2023 Conservation Commission meeting, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Sue, if you could do the roll.
Sure. Sharples.
Absent.
Chris Blackstone.
Absent.
David Bell.
Here.
Ellen Snyder.
Here.
Fred Copeland.
Present.
Julianne Tyson.
Present.
Helen Lawson.
Present.
Tom Jones.
Present.
Brian Ward.
Here. Yay.
Yes, welcome, Brian. Glad to have you.
Hello, Nora.
So I know Melissa and Chris are not coming, so I will appoint both Tom and Colin as voting members tonight.
Thank you.
All right, any public comment? I think everybody here is speaking at different times. So, Paul, do you want to say anything in public comment, or you just? Yeah. All right, sounds good.
Thanks.
All right, so we are going to jump into our guest speaker, who's Doug Sagan, who is the New Hampshire Invasive Species Coordinator. I've known Doug for quite a while. We've done some invasive projects together. We're both a little bit obsessed with invasive plants, maybe. So Doug is going to focus, I think he'll talk broadly about invasive plants, but particularly about identifying and managing invasive Japanese knotweed.
Yeah.
So welcome, Doug.
So thank you, everybody, for having me come and speak. You should have a copy of my book, which is my business card, and it has all my contact information on the back, telephone number, email address. Email is the preferred way to get in touch with me, and our website link, which has information regarding invasive plants, fact sheets, and such. So Ellen asked me to come and just talk about Japanese knotweed. So this is just one of the presentations I give. And what we're going to do is just kind of talk about like some of the characteristics of Japanese knotweed, what we're trying to do, and what the state program is, and ways that we can try to control it. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. You know, turn this on. All right. So historically, Japanese knotweed was originally scientifically named Rainutia japonica, and then it went through a series of name changes. It went to Phlogium cuspidatum, and then Fallopian japonica, and then, oddly enough, it reverted right back to its first name, Rainutia japonica. So scientific names change somewhat often, depending on the plant. So the copy of the invasive guidebook that you have, you'll note that it says 2023, and it has the revised names in there, as well as the revised links. The last one I produced was in 2018. And it's actually a good little book. We've distributed well over 40,000 so far. And so, Japanese knotweed issues. It's probably one of our worst invasive plants. I tell you, I lose sleep over this plant. It's highly adaptive to new environments. You can come into many places. It often comes in with fill material and little tiny rhizomatous fragments. It outcompetes native plant species, so it creates these dense canopies. It reduces and eliminates species diversity. So when you get into stands, it's a monotypic culture, and the leaf canopy is so closely meshed that there's very little light that allowed to trickle down to a florist, to the canopy floor. But the stems are so dense, and there's also liliopathic properties that are excreted by the rhizome, the underground portion of the plant, as well as the crown. And allelopathic properties, actually, it's survival of the fittest. These chemicals preclude anything else from coming in. So this is one of the adaptations that this plant has. It's kind of diabolical. It controls or contributes to erosion. A lot of our stream channels, rivers, lakes, ponds, things like that, when knotweed comes in, scouring damage from ice sheet flow or erosion can carry away fragments of knotweed and their stems or their crowns or their rhizomes and transport them downstream. So if you have a river corridor and you only have one knotweed plant up in the headwater, your entire river corridor is going to be inundated with knotweed within a matter of time because those fragments are very viable And it only takes a little tiny half-inch long fragment to turn into a new plant. So the impact listed threatened and endangered species, we have a wood turtle, species of special. Wood turtle is found in the Baker River up north, but there's also a lot of Japanese knotweed on the Baker River. So unfortunately, this wood turtle needs the upland forest area, floodplain forest, for nesting, breeding, and foraging areas. But it's almost impenetrable because of these stands of knotweed, so it can't migrate from the water to these uplands or vice versa. And structural damage. You always hear those horror stories about knotweed, especially in Europe, and knotweed starts breaking through concrete walls, floors, and things like that. Well, it actually does happen. It can alter pavement, roadway pavement, or sidewalks, or any other structure. The rhizomes can get actually very large in diameter. The biggest one I've ever seen is 3 inches in diameter, but I imagine that they can actually get bigger. Well, as plants grow, and this is true with all plants, wood plants or Japanese knotweed, as the rhizome or the root grows larger in diameter, you can't really exert and displace the earth below. So the easiest and the simplest thing that's going to give way and relent is anything that's above it, whether it's a building, whether it's a stone wall, whether it's asphalt or whatever. And so often you're going to have structural damage because of that. So Japanese knotweed can get up to 10 feet tall in most cases, probably 9 feet tall. It's a very stout plant. Often people think of it as bamboo, but it's not bamboo because it has segmented stems. The segments shown here are partitions, and without those partitions, those hollow stems would have no rigidity to remain upright. They would just flop right over. So those are for structural integrity. The problem with that, though, is each segment, which is also shown here, has potential node development. So you can actually have adventitious shoots and roots forming from each one of these nodes. And it does happen. So knotweed is in the buckwheat family. And buckwheat has the typical zigzag stem. Japanese knotweed has a truncate leaf pattern for the most part. Leaves can get 6 to 7 inches long. Sometimes they're 3, but those are usually the younger, smaller ones. The leaves are actually kind of pubescent on the top and rough on the bottom. So identifying characteristics, they flower from August to September. So during that time period, that's one aspect where we do not do any herbicide management. I'm an advocate of IVM, integrated vegetation management. It's the same thing as IPM. And so looking at the different methods for whether it's mechanical, cultural, biological, or chemical. And so depending on what the issue is, dictates pretty much what method you're going to select. So a stand like that right there, you're probably looking at mechanical and probably chemical, or mechanical and smothering. Smothering would be just a mechanical type of control measure. Flowering can occur in panicles going upright, horizontal, or even drooping. The leaves can be dark green to light green. And the flowers are very small and diminutive, and the raceme is very small and slender. And it's about maybe 1/4 inch to 2/8 inch.
Is the coloring an age?
I'm sorry?
Is coloring an age adaptation of the plant? Like, why is there dark and light together?
Truthfully, I have no idea.
Huh.
Because you can actually have them literally growing in the same patch. And it's very unique because you'll see these really dark green foliage leaves right next to it could be one of lighter green. And it could be some variation in the plant. I'm not exactly sure. And I haven't figured that out either. And I wish I could. But Japanese knotweed is a very elusive plant. So the flowers turn into a calyx. And so this is under magnification, and then the seed and the seeds inside. The literature shows that the seeds are sterile. So I thought, well, out of curiosity, I'm going to go around and collect seeds from different knotweed stands throughout the state, mix them all together, and see what happens. Well, I got 98% germination. So the seeds are not sterile. They are very viable. However, with that, imagine if all these large populations of knotweed that you see on the sides of the road, all those seeds actually germinated. Wouldn't we have far more knotweed than what we actually have, but we don't? So it's either a matter of predation, cold, too much moisture, could be a lot of different things, or it could be the allelopathes from the rhizome that are excreted to prevent competition from coming in. I'm not sure why. But I do often see seedling development, but I don't think that's the biggest cause for what we're seeing with the majority of the spread. Is mostly because of fragments, and fragments from the underground portion. So this is a crown for Japanese knotweed. These are shoots, so that's one shoot right there. There's another shoot on the other side. That's a rhizome. That's a rhizome. These are the small, fine, fibrous roots. So the majority of the underground portion of the plant is rhizome. Rhizome is underground material, so it really doesn't have a lot of woody integrity. It's not rigid, so anything can come along and break it and snap it, especially along a stream or river corridor. And along the rhizome, you have these dormant lateral buds. And they just sit there and don't really do anything until you cut the plant. So if you had Japanese knotweed the size of this podium right here, and it's just one collective bunch of shoots, and you cut it down, well, that triggers these dormant buds to start developing, and they could be out here. So all of a sudden, you cut down this one problem that might be causing a site distance issue, or you just don't like it. You cut it out, and then all of a sudden, it triggers that response. So then you get new development of new shoots, as well as new shoots developing where you cut the other ones. So your population size actually gets bigger and worse. So safety, other issues are going to be more problematic. The underground portion, the rhizome, this is a photo that I took off of the internet, Pinterest, and you can see this matrix. These large diameter rods, those are all rhizomes, and that's quite a network. Literature says that they can actually go up to 60 feet, and I never believed that. 60 feet is probably, maybe a little longer, say twice the length of this room. That's pretty long. So the rhizome is orange in color if you cut it. Fragments are broken off on stream corridors, carried down by water, ice, scour damage, and it only takes a little tiny half-inch fragment of a rhizome to turn into a new plant. Actually, in my truck, I have one segment that's probably 1.5 inches long, 1/8-inch diameter that I pulled out of a violation. People were building a new home, and the contractor brought in this new fill material, and literally the entire front lawn is all mountain. And so the resolution is they had to go back to the contractor and remove all that soil and dispose of it in a proper method. So it's interesting to see how quickly and competitive this is. And here's one of those examples. So that's literally 1/8 inch in diameter, 2 inches long. And you can see a nice healthy shoot coming out of that. And that came out of the top of a sand pile. So no moisture, no nothing, dry as can be, and it's happy. It doesn't care. And it will turn into a new plant. The stems, this is one reason why we really don't like mowing of Japanese knotweed. We do allow it if the mowing equipment is cleaned off so that fragments aren't moved down the road and deposited, because if you have a big, huge back of a tractor and you're mowing populations of knotweed, you're going to have material caught up in that mower deck, and then you hit a bump, and then a big clod falls off. There's so much moisture in that clump that it's like its own little tiny environment for germination. So this is a 12-inch long segment of a stem, cut in half, put in moist sand, and allowed to develop. So that node, that joint, is right there, and you can see adventitious roots right there and adventitious shoots. So that's the reason why we really do not like mowing. This was a town project, clearing knotweed stems. They removed them, they put them in an area that wasn't really used, but it was a low-lying, wet area with, kind of like mucky soils right on the edge. And sure enough, one of those stems turned into a new plant. Fortunately, we caught it in the time, so we were able to dig it out. So our rules in a nutshell, nobody can collect, transport, import, export, move, buy, sell, distribute, propagate, or transplant any prohibited, listed, invasive species that we have. So this also applies to Japanese knotweed and all its living and viable propagules. So any fragment of the plant that is inadvertently moved is a violation. If it's moved for proper disposal, then we have that, and that is allowed.
What
Right?
about consumption? I know you can eat Japanese knotweed at its very early.
Well, as long as it doesn't survive going through your system, then I think
Okay.
we're good. I think that would constitute control. I've never had that question come up, but that's cool. So yeah, fragments are being moved in topsoil. And I was surprised. So I'm an inspector for the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture. The invasive species coordinator position that I hold has never existed, and I've been doing that for 20 plus years. Unfortunately, Senator Bob Gatta from up north, when I told him I'm looking at retirement in about 2 years, he literally said, "This is unacceptable. We need to create this position. We can't allow everything that I've done to lapse." And so they went through the process. It's the only time I think I've ever heard of anything going through the legislative house, both parties in the Senate, and no issue. Few amendments here and there. And then they'll be funded this year. So with hope, I might be the official invasive species coordinator come this July after 20 years. So, as a nursery inspector, which is what I do now too, I'm also an inspector for the USDA. So doing an inspection at a nursery, I was shocked to find that they were selling variegated Japanese knotweed. Some, I don't want to say idiot, but they probably are, decided to actually take Japanese knotweed and turn it into a saleable variegated variety. Wow, that's insane.
I was gonna ask you about that because on Ash Swamp Road, there's a fair amount of knotweed, and there's one variegated plant
Really?
on the side of the road. I could point it out to you if you're ever interested in seeing it.
I think I might be interested because
Yeah.
I'm always interested in seeing different
It's-
anomalies.
I've never seen it except at that one spot, and I can't believe I wrote a note here to ask you about it.
Yeah, cool. Let me know.
Yeah, I could
we'll take a look.
pinpoint it on the map too.
So anyway, that resulted in a violation. There were fines and ordered for destruction. So this is what I was talking about with rare and endangered species. Here's our little wood turtle. Just flying around, but this is the Baker River, and this is up in Grundy. Everything that you can see, all of this is all Japanese knotweed. Pure stand along the edge. And the density is so thick that nothing can really get through it. So that's a problem. And then stream corridors, agriculture. So this is Cold River, this is Walpole, and all this knotweed. Well, on the other side of the Cold River is the Connecticut River. And if you think this is bad, Connecticut River is far worse. It's just pure knotweed. So impacts to knotweed, you can see that there's an active farm field right here being tilled and all. And the problem is, all those little tiny fragments of the rhizome that are near the surface that are getting chewed up by the tillage are actually getting moved around throughout the farm field. So that's probably one of the reasons why this area is so thick, and they just decided to cultivate on the inboard side. But if you let that go, I'm sure knotweed would just fill that entire site very quickly. And then we had Hurricane Irene. This is before Hurricane Irene. That's that same area with all that knotweed. This is after Hurricane Irene. All that knotweed is now gone. All those living viable propagules moved downstream into the Connecticut River. So it impacts the site distance, so you have roadway infrastructure arching over the roadway, so that's a definite issue for safety concerns. So in this case, you're best off to cut it and try to do something for management to keep it under control. Impacts to recreation, so you have kiosks, boat trailers, signage that gets overwhelmed with knotweed. And then you always hear the story about the people in Europe and their issues. So they treat Japanese knotweed as material, and if you get caught moving knotweed, that's a hefty fine, and possibly even jail time. So this homeowner paid a contractor to build a house on a slab. Contractor did that, and then when they were getting their occupancy permit, I think they saw that knotweed was coming up through. So it broke through the slab and started punching through the walls. So instead of giving occupancy permit, they were ordered to demolish their house. So not only did they have to pay to build the house, they also had to pay to demolish it. So this doesn't always happen in Europe. It happens here in New Hampshire. And this property owner asked me to come out and take a look, identify the plan. I'm like, oh yeah, that's knotweed. But what's that in your basement? So we went down into their basement and they had no idea. It came through cracks in the foundation. Whether the cracks were there before or the knotweed created the cracks, I don't know. But it's clear that Japanese knotweed is going under the structure and will cause damage no matter what. Then you get into other infrastructure. So homeland security. You get into issues where you have cover where people could hide things. So this would be definitely some kind of security threat. So this cleared out, I would imagine. So then our rules took effect in 2004. And so anything from 2004 on, which included all those different aspects, moving, selling, distributing, whatever, would be a violation. So I worked for the state for almost 30 years. I worked for the Department of Transportation, their Bureau of Environment, doing NEPA documents for 7.5 years. Fortunately, one of the aspects of doing that is that I knew a lot of people. I knew people in the commissioner's office and everybody throughout the building in Concord. And so I had a lot of flexibility with regards to having meetings with people and discussing potential resolutions. So this was a discovery that I found, and so this is a new construction project, and now we started appearing. And so this was the beginning of like something that I thought we need to start handling. So I had a meeting with our commissioner's office and the Bureau of Environment, and we came to a resolution. Every single project from that point forward was going to require an invasive species control management plan. Every single project, from the little sidewalk project to the widening of I-93 down south. And we're the first and only state in the nation at the time to actually implement something like that. What this allows is that would go through, do survey, figure out what's where, and map everything, and then come up with a strategy to control it. So during construction, it would be moved. And so this was huge. It changed a lot of things for the better. And this was a violation that was reported to me, I want to say like 6 years ago. And I arrived to the site and found that where the excavation appeared to be taking place were cliff walls. So cliff walls, I don't think, build nests in an area that's being excavated actively. So I didn't deem it a violation. So I met with the property owner, talked to him, even wrote him a letter of what he needed to do because he needed to sell any of this material. He needed to manage the knotweed. He couldn't sell it with living and viable populace, and he was well aware of that. Until 4 years ago, it got reported as a violation again. So I show up out there, and lo and behold, they had an excavator, trucks there. He sold the pile to one individual and the property to somebody else, and the pile had to be gone in a week. So, well, nothing we could do but dig. So we dug out all the knotweed. He lost half the pile, which is a very large pile. So this is a crown for Japanese knotweed. That was that one right up there. And this is a rhizome coming off the base. That's diameter. That's massive. That's a copy of this book for scale. By the time we dug down, which was literally about 20 feet, it went from 3 inches up on the top down to 2 inches and kept going. That's one of the biggest issues that we have with this plant is the massive underground rhizome system with a lot of stored carbohydrates, making it very difficult to control. So here's the excavator. This whole section was lost because of that, and you can see knotweed right there, so it was about to tackle that. Mowing, we prefer not to have knotweed mowed. Once again, it stimulates the lateral dormant buds, so mowing should be avoided if possible. Sometimes you need to mow for safety. Smothering. is a great way to control knotweed. So there's a Japanese knotweed best management BMP manual that I provided to you folks, and one of the aspects that's covered in here is smothering, because smothering actually does work. It takes like 5 to 10 years, typically about 5 years, and I've had full success with every single effort that I've done with this type of control. So how this is accomplished, you cut knotweed down this time of year, beginning of June, right close to ground level, but the shoots are kind of woody and sharp, so you need a cushion layer. You put a cushion layer down, then you put your membrane, whether it's black plastic, it could be rubber roofing membrane that you get from a contractor pulling out the rubber roof. It could be billboard signs, which are UV protected and they just throw them in the trash. Or it could be the weed fabric that nurseries often put down to keep the weeds out of their nursery stock areas, because they have to pull those up every once in a while and like get rid of them. So it's like repurposing some of these materials. And then ultimately you want to put 4 inches of bark mulcher with chips on top. So you get the cushion layer, the membrane, and if it was the size of this room, you would probably at least have a couple seams. You overlap the seams by a couple feet, and if you can staple them together, that's even better. But the 4 inches of material that's on top does a lot of things. It keeps that barrier tight to the ground, so there's no voids for any new knotweed development to occur underneath. But it does, it will. It gets rid of the eyesore, it gets rid of cold crack damage, it gets rid of UV ray degradation to that barrier membrane material. It gets rid of the potential for somebody flicks a cigarette butt and burns a hole in it. Even this site right here, there's like one knotweed plant because one of the rough shoots actually perforated through it, and it was of an inch in diameter. But within probably a month's time, a new knotweed plant had found its way up through that, and so when I pulled it, I could literally see the membrane move like 4 feet away. So it traveled 4 feet before it came up. But this does take 5 years, give or take, but it works. That's another shot. I even went back a couple weeks ago, and this was done actually quite a while ago, and the site looks great. Another method that's being used in Europe is girdling with 1/2-inch metal hardware cloth, which is this material here. So it's galvanized steel, 1/2-inch squares. It's very rigid and very tight. You have to be careful because as your edges are sharp. You cut the knotweed down this time of year. You roll out the barrier, this metal hardware cloth, and you get it as tight to the ground as you can, because you don't want billowing, you don't want tenting, you don't want the knotweed to develop underneath it and just kind of start growing underneath it. What you want is to have it start growing up through it. So because this is being tried in Europe, I thought I'd give it a try. So I worked through GOT. We have 2 sites in the Keene area, and we have one up in Wolfboro. And we're experimenting to see how good this is work out. I'm not sure if it's going to be the end-all be-all. I've heard reports where it doesn't work that well. And then also you have problems, what do you do when you have to remove it? Because it basically gets locked to the ground through roots and other material and things. But you don't want to have a tractor drive over it and mow it and then pull it into a mower deck, because that would cause a nightmare. So essentially what happens, the knotweed stalk, and I took this literally earlier this season, so this is from our New Hampshire site over in Keene. The plant gets girdled, so the shoot will still continue to grow, but energy is going up. So knotweed is one of those bee plants where energy is constantly moving up during the growing season and doesn't really send nutrients or carbs back down. That happens later. Most plants, they're moving up and down simultaneously throughout the season. So theoretically, energy should be put into the plant, producing new shoots as much as it can, but then as the stem gets bigger in diameter, it's restrained and girdled by those squares. So then come fall, nutrients can't go back down. So it's spending energy, so it's using energy. It doesn't really know that it's threatened or impacted because it can grow. It's not like cutting. I can see the theory in this actually being effective, but once again, we just started doing this literally 2 falls ago, so 2 years ago. So this will actually be the first full growing season that we've actually had this going. So we'll see what happens. So I also have invasive species statewide initiative. So I'm a licensed herbicide applicator, and I always believe in leading by example. And I felt that, well, if these plants are bad, or what's favorite invasive plants, maybe we should be doing something to manage it instead of just saying, well, too bad. We should be doing something. So this is my permit. These are all the roads, major roads that I have permitted. Massachusetts is here, Vermont is here, Maine is over here. So this is I-93 all the way up to Vermont. So with this permit, it allows me to do herbicide applications. It's a very rigorous process, and these maps show me where I can spray and where I can't spray, because there are public drinking water supplies, there are wells, and other elements that we need to avoid. So I've been doing this since 2012. So I've got backpack sprayers, I've got PVC tubes. Sadly, every brand new sprayer that I've had always drips. Brand new, doesn't matter. So for flow recovery, so I don't have impacts or back of the truck, I have 2-inch diameter PVC tubes that I detach when they get a certain amount of fluid in it, and I pour it back into the herbicide container. So it's flow recovery, everything is in secondary containment. So there is no possibility of having an issue, and everything is strapped in. I do not advocate anybody doing herbicide applications during flowering period because of pollinators. Honeybees love Japanese knotweed. They absolutely love it. And so once flowering starts, we stop. So this is one site that I started in 2013. You can see the scale of my truck. It overtops it. And so that's a massive stand of knotweed. And this site I did using 5% Roundup Pro with a little bit of Milestone, and this, as well as all that, was that. So that site actually looks pretty good right now. And then on I-93, this is up in New Hampton area, going up towards North Ashland, to Plymouth, and other areas. There's, for some reason, a lot of knotweed in the right-of-way and the median. And so once again, after doing a herbicide application, it looked pretty good. Now I have to give you a caveat that sadly, since I did these 4 years, even I'm seeing regeneration. And I assume because that rhizome is so large and extends for 60 feet, the amount of shoots that are connected to those rhizomes is very small. The amount of herbicide that we're putting on is very small. It can't translocate that entire length. So I think the herbicide goes to a certain point, and then stops, and then what remains viable has enough energy and follows that channel where the rhizome died, and then comes back, and it takes 4 to 7 years. 7 years out, and I thought I had all these successes. So this is a reality for me. I just want to be truthful with everybody, is that it's very, very hard to control, extremely hard to control. And so this is the knotweed BMP manual that I put together. I did this in 2018, and I got a grant to do the printing, and I sent a copy to every single town in the state, so 212 towns. And so these went to the highway departments as a means to help thwart the spread of Japanese knotweed, but I still know that practices are still occurring. Knotweed gets moved in ditch work, roadway work, things like that. It just moves in soil with water. You just have to be very, very careful. So like I mentioned, I've been doing herbicide application the IBM program since 2012. And then, because I used to work for DOT, and I had to get their approval. And then in 2016, I think they felt really sorry for me because I would literally park my truck, stop, head out, put on a backpack sprayer, walk up and down the right-of-way, spraying knotweed and other invasive plants, walk back to the back and leapfrog. And I did this for like 4 years, but I covered a lot of territory. And then in 2016, they actually formally organized, and they requested 2 people per DOT district get licensed to be herbicide applicators to help support the program, which they did. and I am very thankful for that. Sadly, COVID hit, and so people moved on, and a lot of things changed, and so DOT is, I think, still down by 30% in terms of employment. So we're having issues with that, getting people. So we go out this is a bypass of Route 1. DOT provides attenuator trucks for my safety, especially this is the median going into Maine on I-95, and it's kind of horrifying when you have 18-wheelers driving like 80 miles an hour right by you, and you're standing in the back of a cone basket, which is this. And so this is one thing that I've adapted, is that instead of walking up and down highway right-of-ways, where if we could simplify it and make it more efficient, so they had one of these cone baskets sitting on the side, and I asked if we could just attach it, and then I could get a tank sprayer, and then basically be more mobile. And they agreed, and so we started doing that, and so we just drive, and we're literally able to treat miles and miles. Now, I'm very environmentally sensitive, so I try not to put out more than what I need to, so I'm literally trying to target the plant as much as I can. But knowing that this clump, I can't get the backside, but I know that. So I put on a little bit of herbicide on the front, and then the next year I'll go back and I'll do spot treatments to do a follow-up, because I don't want to put out more than what I need to. I also work with the Railroad Division, and the Railroad Division with DOT owns 200 linear miles of rail, and so we started working with them. Now, one thing that I was really hopeful is biocontrol. USDA did host specificity tests with Apilaria itidori, which is a plant psyllid, it's a plant lice, and they worked on this for 15 years maybe, and they finally approved it as of like a few years ago. And I'm like, oh, this is exciting. All right, so I contacted them. I coordinated with Fritzy Grevis there from Oregon State University, with UMass Amherst, the Alampi Lab in New Jersey, and I thought everything was great until I got an email that replied, well, sadly to say, they don't overwinter very well, and we're not having much success in terms of finding them. So there goes that idea. Unless things change, this biocontrol is really a no-go. This one you'd think everything was really bad. We also have giant knotweed, and it's big. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of those sites. There's one over in Hampton, which I know of. There's one in Canterbury. There's one in Sanderson. They're very few and far between, and one in Boston. So they're very few and far between, so it's not really a big issue.
Taller, or is it just the leaf as well?
Bigger leaf. Size-wise, it's a little bit taller. Oddly, the literature doesn't say anything about the stem color. So giant knotweed, the stems are just pure green. They're not mottled, where Japanese knotweed, they're mottled. So it's surprising that literature doesn't even talk about that aspect. That's one easy way to identify, especially when it's young, because when young plants, leaves don't start out that big. So that's kind of a key. So this is pretty much nearing the end. So if you want to do mapping for invasive plants, what I recommend is edmaps.org. There's a phone app that you can use. And I'm the verifier, so I'll know if you're using it or not. And if you're not using it, I'm going to call Ellen and complain. So try it out, give it a try, and see how you like it. But it's beneficial, and I recommend people do surveying in the spring and in the fall. If it's for knotweed, now it's easy enough. But a lot of invasive plants put on their foliage sooner than native plants, which makes it easy to spot. And a lot of invasive plants drop their leaves later than native plants, like Norway maple, burning bush, barberry, things like that. So it makes it very easy to see. And so the smartphone app, I've got it on my phone, and it's great, so you can easily go around. So parting notes, create land management plans and goals, figuring out what you want to do, working with the resources that you have. I want to emphasize that if you're bringing fill material in for any project, to make sure that you go to the source. One of the biggest issues, as I mentioned, knotweed's coming in on fill material, And so with that, if you go to the source and you see knotweed on the pile or on their property, I would be hesitant to get anything from you. Chances are there's probably knotweed in that fill material. But remember, it's a violation. So you can contact us and we'll try to follow up and see what we can do. I've got several violations that I'm working on right now. But why get into those issues if you don't have to? So early detection, rapid response, if you find something and it's not really there, like one small knotweed plant that has never been there, you can actually probably dig it out and the problem's done. But if you like, oh, I'm gonna dig that out, and you go in, you have like a glass of wine, next day you wake up and you go off and do something else, and then 2 weeks later and a year later, all of a sudden your single problem turns into a massive problem. Because I do that too. I mean, you get overwhelmed with things and you're like, oh, I'll get to that, then you don't. You know, it's something that we all have issues with, but with the invasive plants, go after it sooner. And work with anybody you can. So as a conservation commission, you have a highway department which has equipment, and if you can utilize some of that as like cooperatively, I think that's to your benefit. And that's pretty much it. So if you have any questions, it's one of those things where there's no end all be all for knowledge. There really isn't. One thing that in Europe they're using is a root wave. It's electrothermal shock. Electrocute the plant, and the electric energy goes through the stem, through the rhizome, and basically burns it, fries it, and develops steam and cooks it. There are no distributors here in the U.S., and I can't find anything with regard to how successful is this long term. And you know, if it's 100% and you can totally get rid of it, and if we can figure out how to get one and funding, I would be totally game for giving it a try and just having one with the state, and we just go around and you know hit some of our bigger populations and see where we can go from there. But that's about it. Smothering is probably your best option, and also cutting before smothering, cutting before herbicide diminishes the stored carbohydrates, which helps ultimately with the eradication process. That's a lot.
What do you do with those cuttings though?
Like the knotweed, so they cut very easily with a brush saw. There's so much moisture and water in the stems that it's self-lubricating and it's just right through. Just leave them. Within probably a week of full sun, they'll turn yellow and brown, then they're dead, they're not going to do anything. But if they're green and you move it, make sure that it's an area that they can dry out. Don't just take them and dump them in a wetland or throw them over an embankment where it might be in contact with moisture. Then you can burn it, chip it, shred. One thing that I should caution you, if you burn green knotweed stems because of the amount of water, and that's an enclosed cylinder, moisture turns to steam, and you get enough steam and it turns into an explosive device, and it will shoot burning embers everywhere, so just be forewarned.
All right.
Yeah, it could be fun. Stand back.
Except we don't
So
have
it's a
enough
grenade
fires.
as well.
I'm sorry?
So it's a grenade as well.
Yes, yes. And you never know where it's going to go.
So Doug, I have to tell a little story about Hated Place, which is a subdivision that they know down in the western part of Newmarket, newer subdivision, and I walked that area almost every day. And I've been working with Doug for a long time, so I knew about knotweed. And one morning I walked and I'm like, oh, there's little knotweeds coming up. So Dan Hardy was our town planner at the time, and because it was a new subdivision, it was still under the developer's control. Hadn't been turned over to the town yet. So the developer had to come in. I can't remember if you actually looked at it then, Doug, but the developer had to come in, and there were like 4 plants, and they were like this big. So they had to dig those 4 plants out. So they did that, and a couple years went by, and then I think I found 2 more, and that's when you came out. And I just ended up digging them up because at that point, having the contractors come out, dig it up, it seemed more environmentally impact to do that than for me just to dig them up and properly dispose of them. So I haven't seen any since then, but I think that's my little story about you can make a difference if you pay attention and get them when they're small, which is what you were saying.
EDRR, early detection, rapid response.
What are the steps, like, if you notice new patch or a patch consistent like knotweed, depending on where
Well, for surveying, you can use like UCF maps and survey it. What I require everybody to do is take a clear photo, because not everybody, I've had people like submit pokeweed as knotweed, so that's why I need photos. And then working with the town or the property owner and figuring out a strategy to manage it. So Ellen brought me down to Water Street down there.
Shandon Park.
Yep. And there's a knotweed population. So we had a discussion about options for that. And depending on what it is, sometimes you can't do anything. And that may be one of the options for that. Just leave it alone. Because the more you tamper with it, the worse it could be. But if you have the means and the ability and the materials and feasibility, then by all means, go for it. Best thing to do is weaken the plan as much as you can. That way it makes control and management so much easier. So like when you cut knotweed in the beginning of June, the plant needs to go into flower into seed production. All plants do. That's what they do. And so you take this plant that normally would be like 10 feet tall, you cut it down right around now, and then by the time fall comes around, if you're going to do an herbicide application, it's now this tall. It's literally like 3 feet tall. So you can see, you can like tell what you're herbiciding. You're not trying to spray something and there's herbicide going everywhere. You're now spraying something that's lower. Less herbicide, less drip, less off-target impacts. Same thing goes like with smothering. By allowing it to grow up until June, cutting it down and then smothering it, it expended a lot of energy just getting to that point. And then we thwarted it by cutting it down and then doing the smothering. If you smother it in the beginning of the spring, well, it's got all that stored energy and no place to put it. So it will start shooting out. And that's the other thing with smothering is you need to, if it's the size of this podium, you go probably a foot or so beyond the podium. If it's the size of like these tables, I would probably go 4 to 5 feet because remember those lattices are going to start popping up. And say you go that, but all of a sudden it does start popping up, but just extend it. Just cut it down, extend the material, add some more bark mulch, and just modify. If you do get a perforation or poke through, move the bark mulch aside, put a patch on it, put the bark mulch back, and you're good. Just be very adaptive.
What's the relationship with knotweed to freshwater to saltwater?
Knotweed doesn't really like salt water. It prefers fresh water, but usually it doesn't really go into the water. I'm not sure if the rhizomes are hit the moisture and then actually divert away from that. I have seen shoots in water, but I can't really tell whether they're like seasonal fluctuations that maybe most of the time it's like a lower water level and then all of a sudden the water comes up and that's why they're in there. I'm not sure about that. But typically you don't really see it in water.
I think we need that heat system. That's going to be one.
Yeah.
Because we have it on the roadsides and we have it on waterways, and we
Yep.
really can't. It's very difficult to control in those two locations.
Yeah. So if we could figure out like what the cost of the machine is, I know it's probably not going to be cheap. We figure out shipping from Europe here, that's a whole other thing. And would they actually do that? I'm sure we could probably figure out some way to get a grant. But that's down the road. Something to think about. Hopefully, if I get that position, that's something that I could try to focus in on a little bit more.
Can you just quickly talk about, because it is on our roadsides and it's moving, and we
Yep.
do have our roadside mowed every year. Any suggestions on how our roadside mowers should
So they
behave?
should avoid it if possible. But I know because of arching over roadway safety, all that, or it could be creating an obstruction in an ephemeral ditch. So then, it's mostly dry except for when rainy events, but then you can get accretion of like leafy material and other debris that can create like other drainage issues. So we do understand all that, but maybe there are ways that they could try to manage it, like if it's possible to do smothering. DOT did a smothering right on the side of Route 106 in Laconia, and it's very busy. It's a wide section of highway, essentially. It's like 3 lanes in that portion. And they never had an issue with the plows tearing it up, and literally went right up to the edge of the pavement. So I was surprised. But over time, I think deterioration has led to some new development with knotweed coming up through, so just haven't had the time to go and patch it. But in the sites that I've worked on, I've never once had regeneration. I know a lot of people tell me, oh yeah, I did smothering, it doesn't work. That's because they just take a tarp or plastic and put it out there and put a couple rocks on and walk away. That's not smothering. You need the compression, you need the weight, you need to have it completely sealed. It can't see light, it can't have wind going through. Part of the aspect is that when you smother something, you get radiant heat that goes through, which also helps to increase the effectiveness of that effect. And typically, if you don't have any light, no oxygen, no air movement, and you have UV rays actually heating it up, it will develop shoots, and they're usually white, which is called iliation, and they'll tend to burn themselves out. It's still expending energy underneath the tarp, but hopefully in time it just peters out. So yeah, smothering worked great, no herbicides, so that's one way. But once again, you can't really do smothering in every site. That's why.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I have another copy of the email.
This is a nice booklet.
Oh, thanks.
Very nice.
Yeah,
Thank
I've been producing that for a number of years.
So you get that, you're on that website?
Yes.
That's you?
Yep.
Okay, all right. I'll take a picture and I'll post one of that variegated on there.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So just a personal note, there is a statewide New Hampshire Invasive Species Committee that Doug is on, and I just got appointed as well, so
Cool.
very exciting. I'm tied to invasive plants whether I want to be or not. Great, thank you again, Doug. Appreciate you coming down.
Very welcome. Thank you.
Good to see you. Okay, we're gonna do a couple things. Do you want to set up your laptop? Okay, so we have the April 13th meeting minutes to approve. Anybody want to make a motion? I don't have any changes.
See any changes, so.
Okay, make a motion, Tom?
Make a motion.
Do I have a second?
Approve.
David seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? Thank you. All right, the May 11th, 2023 meeting minutes. Any changes or a motion to approve? Thank you. Thank you. Really? Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Colin. All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Thank you, Sue. Good minutes. Okay, financial summary. I will review that. Okay, our conservation fund amount is $124,953.09, and we still have $4,764.46 in the Shanda fund. So you total those two, and it's $129,717.55. This past month, we got interest of $287.33. So that was the income we got. And the expenses, we paid out for the kayak rack and lock that rec department purchased for Sliding Rock, and I think they just got it, so they're putting it together, and it will go out to Sliding Rock probably hopefully next week. And then we bought, if you remember, we bought materials, the lumber and so forth for the Wigan Farm boardwalk, and we had budgeted or approved $1,100 back, I guess that was in March, $1,036.95, so that was a pretty good budget. So that was last month, we spent that. And then I have one item to be considered, which I had emailed, but we do apparently have some land use change tax coming, $8,400 for 60 Grant Road, which I think is the house that got built right before the brook, right? Yeah.
Oh,
So
really?
apparently should be coming in any time, so that's nice. We haven't had any for quite a while. $8,400 for 60 Grant Road. It's pending. Yeah. So we might as well do that now. So you recall that after our last meeting, I decided to do the Newmarket Cares Day with the high school students at Shanda Park, and so I needed to buy some supplies, and so that ended up being $144.27 for fencing and some things. Some stuff is left over, which we have, but if I can get approval to get reimbursed for that, again, it was $144.27, and that would actually come out of the Shanda Fund.
Right.
So, if I
I'll make a motion to approve that.
Okay, thank you. Second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you for that. It was great. We got spruced it up nicely, I think.
Yeah, it looks great.
Did you go by? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it did a good job. Okay, and then the general fund budget balance is $1,458.11. And the only expense was $35.64 for Sue's time. And last month we did approve buying some supplies, so I hope to get that done in the next week or so that it comes off of our June, this fiscal year, which the new fiscal year will start July 1st. So any questions about finances? Okay. All right. Very good. All right, so is that working, Drew?
No.
All right. Did you you plugged in that thing? You have to hold on. Let me get the wizards. The wizards are in the back. Hello. Hey, we need we have another presentation. Okay. So as Drew was here month, as you recall, Drew Kefeber is on the Pisgasset Greenway Management Committee for the Southeast Land Trust, and presented preliminary recommendations from that committee, and is going to give the final recommendations that went to the Southeast Land Trust.
Because sometimes laptops don't give enough power.
Yeah.
So we
Well, he's figuring that out.
do a boost.
Part of the committee, there are 2 members from the town of Newfield, and if you remember, we have Neal Mill Road is our side, Class A trail, and Halls Mill Road is Newfield side. And they really wanted to fix up, because they have that really wet, muddy spot on their end, and a member of their community, Steve Shope, is the one in the wheelchair. He has a very robust wheelchair, but he, we talked, that's one of the reasons we wanted to get that fixed, so that it could be accessible, and I think they've already decided to find the money, and they're gonna fix it like any day now. So there might be a bunch of work, and they're gonna come in through the Newmarket side, because that's a better access. So you might see some activity out there. How are we doing?
Good.
Awesome. All right, you're on.
Okay.
Welcome, thanks for coming.
Sure. Thank you for having me here this evening. So I'm here to discuss the Pisgasset Greenway Management Advisory Committee recommendations to the Southeast Land Trust as they relate the proposed management plan update. I came and spoke a month ago. This is just a consolidation of the recommendations, this 3-page document. I believe all of you received a copy of it in your packets, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at it. I don't plan to kind of I plan to roll quickly through this, so if anyone has questions, feel free to ask as we go, and I'll take questions at the end. And we're projecting it as much so that if there's people at home, obviously they didn't receive a copy in their packet because they didn't get a packet, so this is a way for them to be able to see it. So the advisory committee is made up of folks from Southeast Land Trust, the town of Newfields, the town of Newmarket, Fish and Game. And I'm the town of Newmarket representative, which is why I'm here speaking to you folks today. From From a big picture perspective, when the original management plan was created, the Piscassic Greenway was a smaller piece of conserved property. So additional pieces of property have been added to the Greenway since then. And those are predominantly in Newmarket, and therefore that was one of the goals behind having someone from Newmarket in this process. This table here lists the different parcels, when they were acquired, their size, and then conservation easement holders, restrictions, and third-party interests. So it kind of gives you an idea of, in fact, we've got 6 different pieces of property that are all kind of under this one umbrella. There's different funding partners, and therefore each of the funding partners tends to have their own restrictions and or desires that they want to see. So it's tricky sort of navigating that. It's great to have a variety of funding partners, but there's no free lunch.
Do you have an example of, not a conflict of interest, but 2 different varying interests to give us an idea of the challenges associated with it?
Sure. So let's look at, see if I can get my cursor up here. So these 2, the Cole Farm and the Cole Wildlife, we can use those as an example, I think. So they're both partially funded by the town of Newfields, but in the case of the Cole Farm, it also has a USDA, Department of Agriculture, farmland protection. So that's the fields that you see along Bald Hill Road. Because that property had active farmland soils, and it's very good soil, the USDA wants to support that, but they want to see it continue to be used for farming to the extent reasonably possible.
Yeah.
So one of the goals with that portion of that, with that 33-acre parcel, is to try to continue to maintain it so that it's farmed. Right. And as we all know, if you have a field today and you don't keep a field, you do not have a field in 5 years or in 10 years. And so you have to do things, or things need to be done on that piece of property that would not need to be done on the Cole Wildlife because that one is not supported, or was not supported by the farmland protection. It was really for wildlife, not for farming.
And is that written into a contract somewhere that has to be maintained as a farm, active farming entity? I don't mean to slow you down.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's in a contract. It's probably in the deed, and before you can do something that's not on that land, you need to get approval from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And that's, it's bureaucratic for one, and it's not a trivial process. Right. So they, they're.
That could be as simple as a hayfield, if people know, and how silviculture is
Right. And for example, I think this is mentioned elsewhere in here, what's happening on that property right now, or at least on portions of that property, is the folks that own the farm that was the Cole Farm raise sheep, and they use some of the property to have a pen where the sheep go out to pasture and eat. They use some of it for making hay for the sheep. And there's also a community garden, which is in that area. It's right near the parking lot that's just off of Bald Hill. And so that community garden is an approved use because, again, it's an agricultural farm usage.
Yeah.
Yeah. And each one of the different organizations have their different desires, I think is the polite way to say it. I think it is the Tucker 2 with the NRCS Wetlands Reserve. That piece of property is primarily wetlands, and they really don't. They want to keep the wetlands there, and they don't want anything else happening on there. So for example, if we wanted to put trails on there, it would be not trivial to try and do that on that property because of that funding partner.
Right.
So, that's where you kind of have to juggle these different things. Again, it's great to have the funding partners, but there's no free lunch. Forest management, from a big picture perspective, I would say, in general, we're proposing or recommending that we stay within more or less the existing forest management plan, which says, manage the forests primarily for wildlife habitat, biodiversity, and water quality, recreation. One thing that I think we have added here is this note down here that describe the threats and opportunities to forest structure and composition from invasive pests, and more specifically the hemlock, woolly algid, emerald ash borer. So the property has a number of stands of hemlock, which all have this disease, and so it's only a matter of time until those trees are dead. And so that really wasn't the case in 2008 when the original management plan was made. It is the case now, so we need to acknowledge that, and to the extent that the management plan can plan for that change, we think we should.
Yeah.
And same with the emerald ash borer. There are many fewer ash trees out there, but the ash trees that are there are going to die, because that's what's happening.
It's kind of,
Yeah, it's coming. Any questions related to forest management?
Can I say a question about hemlock? Is the thought to remove most of it out there, or just the only reason I'm curious is because if is it like a give up on the hemlock tree or the ash tree, or is there do you leave seed trees in hopes that someday adelgid may pass on after most of the hemlock die in 50, 100 years, and you assume there's seed bank or something? Do we even discuss that?
We didn't. So we did have Charlie Marino, who's the forester who has been doing the management on the property and wrote the management plan. He came out and walked the properties with us as a part of this. We talked kind of in more general terms, and it's not, we're not making a recommendation to either cut down all the hemlocks or anything else. We're saying when this management plan is developed, it should be acknowledged that these issues, concerns exist, and thought about in ways to address it. So removal of some trees is a possibility. For example, one of the things that Charlie mentioned was, if there are hemlock trees out there that would have potential to be saw logs or be lumber in one form or another, it may make sense to cut those down and take advantage of that today, because in 10 years they probably won't be.
right.
And so it's sort of that juggling. It's more an evaluation of the forest, considering and knowing that the forest will change due to these, or more specifically for these specific trees. And related to that, is there, as you said, Jeff, is there a way to support other trees that will come in and succeed these hemlocks? Even if it's not hemlocks, is there a way to open up portions of the forest so that there's succession in a more gradual form than there would be otherwise?
I'm sorry, I was just going to follow up with or management for invasives moving into open areas. Because I know that one area is such a solid stand of hemlock that if I would think, as happened in other areas out there, when they're completely cleared, it opens it up for invasives to move in. So, So I
And
was curious if that was, part of the discussion, but apparently an actual forestry management plan might, is further down the road, it sounds like.
right, yeah, I think the actual management plan will probably get into more detail on that. We're just saying the management plan, knowing what we know today,
Right.
which we didn't know, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, we should at least acknowledge that this exists and try to do things to take appropriate steps.
Drew, there actually may be an entry pretty soon, sooner than, like, there could be one next winter, because it's been a very long time since the last one, and so he'll go into certain parts of the forest. He won't do the whole property. So he might go in off like Halt Mill and Mill Mill, because that's an area that hasn't been treated yet, and there are hemlock in there, but I don't think he wouldn't take it all out in one
Yeah.
entry.
You don't think
Well,
you would?
you do need to start thinking, because I know in North Carolina, you see thousands of acres of dead hemlock. And then you've got a real fire hydrant problem.
Right.
It depends on how fast they die.
Yeah.
Right.
Um,
And
Well,
I mean,
that you gotta look at.
dead trees in the forest are part of the forest too, right? We need to acknowledge that as well.
Yeah.
So,
Or habitat?
yeah. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions related to forest management? Okay, I'm going to move on to invasives management. So obviously there are invasives out there. In general, we're kind of sticking with what's already been pursued out there, and that's things to minimize the spread of invasives, and where possible, do things to try to beat back the invasives. So one area of concern is that early successional habitat was created in some areas by mowing, cutting everything down and then coming back in with one of those brontosaurus machines with the big rotating cylinders that chew everything up at a foot off the ground. One of those areas has quite a bit of glossy buckthorn. And the concern is that if we were to go back in, or if that area were to be retreated mechanically with a brontosaurus, the buckthorn has the potential to spread even more. And so, the goal would be to try to address the buckthorn via invasive species management. And if we need more space for early successional habitat, create that space somewhere else where there are less invasives that would then thrive in the disturbed environment. And then similarly, in the coal fields, there's 2 different invasives that are in there. So one of the things that's talked about in here is, as Doug mentioned, making sure when the fields are mowed, the mower is cleaned prior to coming in to mow the field, and then after the field is mowed, clean the mower before it goes to any other field, including any other field on that property or in that area, because otherwise we'll just be spreading it, just be carrying it on and moving it to the next space. So again, big picture wise, the goal is minimize the invasives as much as possible. But as we all know, that's not trivial. As I stated earlier, there is early successional habitat out there. That's really for the benefit of various wildlife, and the goal is to maintain that and do it over different periods of time so that there's different levels of early successional habitat. So you have some areas that are 3 years old, 5 years old, 8 years old, 12 years old, or whatever the appropriate numbers are. Spread it out so that you have opportunities for different wildlife and different birds and animals at the same time. Fields. The recommendation is to continue to mow and maintain the Gaziano field. That's the one is on the left-hand side as you walk in from Neal Mill Road. And again, the coal fields, keep those, basically any fields that are already fields, keep them as fields to the extent reasonably possible. And in this section, it's also where it's noted to continue the annual agricultural lease for the coal field and for the Helping Hands Newfields Garden. So there's an annual lease that's updated for each one of those agricultural uses on the property. Management access, so there's a few different management access points. And essentially we're saying to maintain those as they are. So Neal Mill Road and the Class A trail network from Newmarket. So if you come in from Neal Mill Road, that provides access to a number of the properties and much of the parcel that is east of the main wetland that kind of runs through the Piscassic Greenway. There's a deeded access through some property that comes off of Route 87. That's the primary access for property that's on the western side of the major wetland complex that pretty much splits this in half. So those are the two main access points for getting larger equipment in and out. And then Bald Hill Road in Newfields. The difficulty with the Bald Hill Road access is that it's rather steep and rocky. And so trying to get equipment in and out of there is not trivial. Any questions on the management access stuff? Again, it's basically sticking with what's already there. Public parking and trailheads. The only one that is really officially on the property is the Miraz trailhead that's off of Bald Hill Road. This parking lot is basically currently can have 4 cars in it. The USDA restrictions say that parking lot can only be big enough for 6 parking spaces. But we're proposing that parking area, given the popularity of the property and its various uses, should be expanded to allow for parking of 6, because it's pretty common that parking lot is cars, and then you have cars parked on Bald Hill Road, which has some sight distance issues, from a safety perspective. So the recommendation is to increase it in size. Neal Mill Road, the town of Newmarket was kind enough to spread gravel onto the side of the road in the road right-of-way there and make for some parallel parking. That's also a well-used parking area. Halls Mill Road on Newfields, there's a little bit of parking kind of at the end of that road there, and again, people in Newfields use that area. The Rockingham Recreation Trail, where the Recreation Trail intersects Route 87, there's a parking area there. That is an access point both for the Piscassic Greenway and for people using the rail trail. And then anyone who's getting into the Piscassic Greenway needs to go through or across the right-of-way that's on the private land, similar to the easement coming off of 87 to get into the Piscassic Greenway proper. And then the last one, the north end of the Burn Trail. This is some property that are on Shanda Drive. And we are recommending that we collaborate with the property abutters in that area to maintain this access point. Just make sure that the property owners are aware that that exists. And if they desire it for entry from their neighborhood, then then something could be done to make it a little more clear. But again, in general, the existing parking and trailheads are being proposed to remain as they are. Any questions on any of those? Okay. Trails and public uses. I think the biggest thing here is, we're sticking with what's already in existence. Really, I don't think there's any change happening here at all. I guess the biggest thing is Southeast Land Trust is updating their policy on motorized wheeled vehicles, and that's for allowing some motorized e-bikes and for electric vehicles for ADA accessibility. So powered wheelchairs, for example.
They are gonna let e-bikes on there?
The answer is yes. Proposal is that it would be pedal assist e-bikes only. And I believe they're class 1 or class A. There's sort of 3 different levels.
Okay.
And it was the lowest power and speed level. And this is something that they're proposing for almost all of their properties. Historically, the language has been no motorized vehicles. And that runs afoul of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
I think they have pollution control.
And so, so as a bare minimum, you need to do that, and then the e-bike question comes up. And so, Southeast Land Trust is working on that, and at least at this point, the proposal is to allow for some e-bikes and for electric vehicles for ADA accessibility and compliance.
They let them, the e-bikes on all on all trails bikes are allowed?
I believe
So
that would
like
be the
Otis Hills
proposal,
and
yes.
Howland, Otis Hills.
Yep. And then the third page is the map of the property that shows the different properties, the various trails, what's allowed on the various trails. And it is noteworthy that we had talked about whether or not it would make sense to try to put additional trails on this property. You can see that the trails are pretty extensive within this property. And given that the statement that by having a trail, you affect the wildlife on either side of that trail by a couple of 100 feet in either direction, we really didn't think it was appropriate to recommend any additional trails. And it's not really shown in here, but again, the wetland that runs right through kind of the middle of this property there's sort of a big empty circle in the middle there, but you can't have too many trails in there because a lot of it's wet, and or you need to have a very extensive bridge to get over it. So for example, this Burn Spur Trail here is where that large bridge that goes across the wetland is. And then up here on the Otis Trail, there's a bridge that comes across the water that's flowing into that wetland. And then the wetland continues to flow out. Comes into the Tucker property here and then goes under Neal Mill Road and goes out to the Piscasset River. So does anyone have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Drew.
If you come up with any questions later, feel free to reach out.
Thanks, yeah.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Okay, next up is the Conservation Commission operating guidelines. So you all read them. Any comments, changes, suggestions, thoughts? They're pretty, just guidance on how we operate, kind of.
Very straightforward.
Seem clear enough? If there are no changes, I would entertain a motion to accept them.
Not a proposed
yep.
change per se, but last page, section 6, finances, the second bullet, that talks about the 50% land use charge tax. I can't remember exactly when it was, but I feel like within the last year we discussed potentially lobbying up to for amending that to 100%. I guess I personally lost sight of that.
Yes,
And-
we did talk about that. We, just because of COVID and budgets and everything, we didn't, decide to move ahead with that proposal. I think it has to be a warrant article, which would be next spring, so we could talk about, is everybody familiar what we're talking about? We get 50% from the land use change tax, and so towns can vote anywhere from 0 to 100, and we've been at 50% ever since it was first approved in '89. And we have, there's a, with this connect the pathways for people in nature, and there's a lot of new funding sources that seem to be coming down the pike, so there may be some opportunities to conserve land if there are interested landowners, and so it would be nice to build up that fund some more.
Yeah.
So would your suggestion to be is not, we could redo the guidelines if we do change it to 100%, but you're bringing it up just because we
Yeah,
talked
more
about
so
it.
for the second, just
Yeah.
because I know it was a topic of discussion
Yeah.
previously. I think the point I had made at the time is, we've conserved like 250 acres in the last 4 or 5 years, so there's been a lot of use, and that land use tax has primarily been what's funded the ability for the town to do that.
How about because in the July meeting, we also review our general fund budget request for the next fiscal year, so let's put that on the agenda. We'll talk about it again and see if we want to put that forward.
I know Bart had brought it up at a meeting
Yeah,
not that long ago.
and we would probably, talk about with the council too, so. Great, okay, thanks. So is it okay to leave the language as it is?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
that was great, thank you. Okay, so a motion to approve as written. Did you have a change?
Yeah, I didn't have a change. I just didn't know if you wanted to mention the fact that the commission comments on planning board matters and sometimes wetland buffer impacts. It might be in there. I didn't see it in there.
I think we
And-
just talked about wetland, it's,
Just wetland
first
permits. Yeah, I saw that.
So you
part.
wanna expand that to say?
I don't know if you feel it's warranted. I mean,
Sure.
there's a planning board rep, so I don't know if
What would
the
be,
language
just
has to be-
suggest a sentence, what would we?
My thought was that there would be provide review and comment on matters before the planning board at their request. And often it's regarding, it hasn't been one since actually I've been on the planning board that I recall, actually, where there are wetland buffer impacts and there's not an actual dredge and fill permit.
We'll just leave it generic, I think generic. So add the bullet, after maybe the wetlands, permit application, provide review and comment on matters before the planning board at their request. Does that sound good? Okay. After the wetland permit applications, doesn't really matter, but somewhere in there. So it'd be like the 5th bullet under responsibility. All right, so any other suggestions? Like those? All right, let's have a motion to approve. Yes,
I
sorry.
was gonna make a motion to approve.
All right, as amended?
Yeah,
Okay,
I make a motion to approve as amended.
great, I have a second.
Second.
Thank you, Tom. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great, so we'll revise that and we'll send it out to you as the final. Thank you. It's helpful to have. Okay, on to committee board reports. Town council, Brian, again, welcome. Thank you
Hello.
for being here as our representative. You have the floor.
All right. Well, yesterday the town council met. We started with a workshop on ways to improve community outreach. We worked on some of the ideas that we're kind of going to pursue are like a town podcast, some videos on the various boards, and inviting various groups such as the American Legion in the Legion Hall, the Gardening Club to come to the town council and talk with us about problems they're facing, things that they've been working on, and some other ideas along those lines. We also talked about the sewer break underneath the Lamprey River. I hope everyone knows what I'm talking about. Okay, then there is by the Newmarket Mill space underneath a 4 feet underneath the riverbed, a pipe broke carrying sewage. It was activated 1.5 hours a day. It was leaking into the river. We had divers go down and test it, edit it. New Hampshire the state of New Hampshire says the water quality is fine for recreation and fishing to continue. Basically, they put some dye in there and it basically floats up and then it kind of dissipates really quick. So, but we're now basically trying to figure out a way to fix it quickly. We've hired someone, Wright Pierce, to look at it. They've worked with us before. Super early phases, but again, given where it is underwater, this may be a very complicated task. And while that was being done, we also found out the bridge between over the river is starting to rust a bit, so it may need to get replaced soon. So, you know.
The main bridge here.
The one from like,
Well,
no,
The pedestrian bit?
the pedestrian
Oh, the
bridge.
pedestrian bridge.
Sorry, yes.
Not the main bridge.
Sorry. Sorry, my bad. The pedestrian bridge.
Okay.
Just because of, just wear and tear
Yeah,
of
okay,
water,
that makes
but
sense.
that's just, found one problem, then found another.
Yeah.
Can you share again where the pipe is going under? What's the location?
Okay, it is right behind Newmarket Mills by the docks. So if you were, everyone here know where Mill Space is? If you went to the Mill Space and then went out the back to that parking area, it's around that area. I don't know exactly specifically, but that's the general area. So it's below the dam.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Sorry, I wrote these notes just for myself, but I had to read them out today. And the Civic Red system has gone live. That is our new town notification system. So if people can sign up for it, just go to our website and sign up, and it'll send email, text, notifications about any urgent matters regarding the town. So, and part of our master plan, we got a company called Placework to look at our various facilities. Two of the things they looked at were the expansion of our police department and potential expansion of this building to make it a little more user-friendly, potentially expanding out. This is super early, nothing is in, but the idea would be to try to extend the building out this way, put more of the public, like town hall, town clerk offices downstairs, and then move our buildings around and such. And yeah, that's town council stuff.
Very nice, thank you. This is as thorough as we've had in decades. It's very nice. Much appreciated. I think, do you have any questions for Brian? So we had, if you remember, we voted to send a letter to the town council about the Oldie Road.
That's going to be written as a resolution and then put forward. So.
Great. So this is to reclassify Oldie Road from a Class 6 road to a Class 8 trail. Thank you. Awesome. Moving along.
Two readings, so yeah, it'd be a resolution then, yeah.
Yep. Great. Awesome. Thank you. Planning board. Jeff.
We met before our last meeting, and we meet next week, so we have not had a meeting in the interim, so nothing new. I'm not sure what's on the agenda because we have not received it of it. So.
Okay.
Sorry, I have nothing to report.
That's all right. I just have one thing, because you recall we also voted sometime a while back to support, write a letter of support to the planning department for a coastal resiliency grant for updating the master plan. And so I wrote that, and I think it was in your packet for Bart, and he submitted that to. So it's going to be a grand master plan update, and the riverfront will be a big part of that. Riverfront Advisory Committee, Shanda Park, Sam.
Similar comment to Jeff. We met right before our last meeting, and our next meeting is Monday. So we haven't had a formal meeting. I guess two potential things worth mentioning. Ellen, Bart, and I and Amy had met down in Shanda Park, which kind of led to the quick turnaround of getting the kids out there right before Memorial Day. So awesome. Glad that that was able to come through. Just get a little TLC for the park. The other thing I would mention is, I cannot remember what month it was, but when the Nature Conservancy came to us and asked about potentially putting in an oyster garden down at Shanda Park, that's come back to the surface, and we hope to meet them down there also on Monday and potentially talk about where to put that this summer.
So the hole got filled in by DPW.
Oh, nice.
Karen
I
did
haven't
it.
been down there yet.
Yeah, so there's a big hole right where we were thinking of having it, and DPW got some riprap and filled that hole, so.
Excellent.
Thank you, DPW. Great, any questions for Sam? Thank you. Anybody, energy?
Yeah, so since we last met, the town council did approve, the community power electric aggregation plan. So we are moving forward, with CPCNH, which is the Community Power, Coalition of New Hampshire. And Newmarket, I believe, will be in the third wave of towns of New Hampshire, to join CPCNH, once we get the ball rolling. So the next steps, for us is to be completing this, update to the master plan on how we would go about this and our suggestions on what we would like to see, for sustainable energy, efficiency and all that, among all areas of the town. So it's a long document that we've been meeting over, each month to edit. Yeah, so spring of 2024 is what we're looking at, for the launch of community power. And the way it would work is that would become the default for the town, and you would, you'd get a letter in the mail that said this is now your, electric supplier, and then you could choose to stick with Eversource or, another source, when it is rolled out.
Cool. Any questions for? Thank you. Other committees? I don't know if there's anyone here. I think that's everybody. All right, initiatives. Try to move along. I know we got some other things on the agenda. Pathways for People and Nature. So we had Pete Steckler work on these 2 maps, and they're kind of done. We're going to get them printed out, and then we still have some information to add to them about trails and trail networks. So that's still sort of in the works. Bart and I met with the Durham Planning Board, they were interested in what we were doing, so they had lots of questions, a lot of similar issues, particularly around the housing and transportation side of things, but also about trail connectivity. Stream and wildlife crossings. Colin.
Just working on it, still have a little bit of work to do.
That's great.
So I'm hoping probably we should have a draft by our next meeting.
Okay.
I'll send it out beforehand and people can
Great.
take a look at it.
Great. This is looking at all the data for the culverts in town. It's awesome.
Should I talk about the boulder trail?
Yeah.
Or do you want me to wait on that?
Just wait for a second.
Okay,
There's,
great.
we'll do it under land stewardship, so it's kind of under there. Pollinator pathways, Melissa's not here, and I don't have any updates on the pollinator kits. So land stewardship, Sliding Rock Recreation Conservation Area or Conservation Rec. We have the LRAC grant, and I mentioned the kayak rack, which should be going in soon. All the boats except one are gone. Yay. So these were just people who were keeping their boats there and tying them up, and everything was a little bit of a mess. So we had some signage put down.
Did you have to go down and cut?
No, there's one boat left, but we have to decide. It's got a lock. And you were looking at, and I've got a contractor working on the panel. I've given her a lot of the information, and she's starting to work on the design for the interpretive panels. And you were checking out fencing.
I've been pulling together different, various types of fences and costs, but it's not designed yet.
Totally, that's totally fine. This is because we want to fence off some areas that are eroded, so, and then guide people to where they can take their boats. Yeah. Piscataqua River Lazelle entrance sign. Melissa's on that. Don't have any updates. Wigan Farm, just an update. We have the UNH interns. They started today. We worked for 7 hours at Wigan Farm, cutting brush and pulling invasives. So I'm a little tired today, but we'll be back there tomorrow at 8 o'clock. If anybody's free, wants to join us, bring some gloves, loppers. It's really good work, and we've been clearing the stone wall in the back for the field. It's looking beautiful. So we're hoping that we can maybe get somebody to more routinely mow along the stone wall and keep it open. So could use some help. Yeah, so feel free. We'll be there probably at least till noon. I might go to a different property, and then we'll have them on Tuesday and Wednesday and may do some stuff at Heron Point. Haven't decided yet, but if anybody's interested, happy to keep you posted, and again, feel free. Okay, Dearborn driveway right-of-way easement is being signed, so it's done. Steve Fournier has signed it, yay. The abutter will sign it, and then it goes back to Fish and Game, and they will sign it, and then we'll record it. So, almost there. Okay, I'm done. You're up. Okay, we gotta put the photos up.
Yeah, if we can
Okay.
show them.
Should I do a quick
Yes, go ahead.
mention of
please.
Lauren White
Yes. Go
and UNH? So, we discussed that there was a grad student from UNH that wanted to monitor culverts and crossings for turtles and whatnot. Yeah, so we met out at the culvert by my house and kind of showed them what we've seen over time, and they did place 3 camera traps out there, and they've been out once back to collect images off of it. So, and I know she has a couple other spots around town with camera traps as well. Yeah, and then there was also a sizable landings, yeah, that got run over. Yeah, well, yeah, that was one by our house that we know of, and there were like turtle eggs all over the road and stuff. It was kind of a mess. There's a beaver now. Yeah, there's a beaver. Yeah, and there were a couple other painted turtles, but you know.
I haven't seen any, I'm ready to stop.
Yeah, I'm curious what she finds in the camera traps, though, because the one that got hit was like crossing the road, and somebody stopped and threw it in the water instead of moving it, and like my wife went down and looked at it, and she's like, oh, and I went down and we saw it swimming, and we're like, it's probably gonna come back up, so we checked on like every 10 minutes, and then we were up in the yard, and she heard something, and we went down there, and it got hit. It's like, oh, we were so close to helping it, but we didn't want to like. No, they were broken all over the. And I didn't share the pictures of it online, but I've thought about it to shock people.
Can
I
you
didn't
start,
do it.
in case we can't get it hooked up,
Yeah,
can you
I know,
start
I didn't
talking
do it,
about
but-
the, sorry, can you start talking about
Sure,
the
yeah.
folder trip? Sorry to interrupt.
It's really, really quick. So, Bart and I and Melissa have talked to the Boulder group. I think I mentioned that at our last meeting. They came at the trail, and I don't know if everybody knows where that trail is. That's why I wanted to show it up on the map. But it goes from Sanborn Street, Sanborn and Lamprey Street. There's an trail entry there, and it goes out to Dame Road. So it's not a very long trail, but as part of their purchase of that property, they had to have this conservation trail accessible to the public. So what we want to do, it's a pretty wet trail with a lot of roots on it, is just clean it up. Maybe get some wood chips in there, maybe do a boardwalk on one section of it where the drainage goes right through the trail. It's pretty muddy. And the landowners agreed to it. The association board agreed to it. So we're working on that, and we'll probably design some sort of approach when we review it. The bigger piece of that, which I'm excited about, is they had mentioned before that they did not want us to veer off of that trail to come out towards Bay Road. So they own a strip of land that goes from the Boulder development out to Bay Road, where we could potentially have the trail go through over a stream channel, access Heron Point from that point. So it would extend that potential, in-town trail out to the Heron Point loop, which could be really an awesome piece if we could do that. There is a piece of land and a landowner that has, if we could get a right-of-way through that piece of land, you could stay in the woods the whole way. Or if not, you come out to Bay Road, go up to the trailer park, and then how people access it now is go through the trailer park and then walk around the Heron Point that way. So anyway, it's in process. Paul here, who's joined us tonight, lives on the Dame Road end of the trail. And I don't know if you want to share anything about the trail.
I think we're gonna have to bag the photos, sorry.
Photos? Okay, great. I can get it organized for next time to really show people where it is.
No, it does get money there. That does sound awesome, that is it connected to, Heron Point.
Yeah. And I think the big piece there, the bigger piece besides Heron Point is if we go past the boulder development over the stream and we turn, it would kind of be northwest, it potentially the multiple parcel Cheney's property that could get up to the Sweet Trail. And I think Bart's interest is how can we get people starting in town all the way up to the Sweet Trail. So there'd be a lot of juggling to do that, but I think it's pretty exciting if we could connect the Sweet Trail with a trail coming into town. So we're working on that. I walked from the top of the Sweet Trail. What's the road that crosses the in Durham that
Long
goes
Marsh?
through?
What it?
Long Marsh. So from Long Marsh, we walked all the way down through to Dame Road and then past Dame Road and came out on the Sweet Trail. And there is a way to walk down through the Cheney properties. Whether they would give us permission to do that or not, to be seen, or if that land could be purchased and protected. But it's a pretty exciting start to what potentially could be a great hiking trail all the way into town. Yeah. So more on that next month.
Worked out.
Yeah.
Is that what the thought is, to get from Bay Road to Heron Point, like an easement of sorts, or just an agreement, like a handshake agreement, or like an actual easement to build a trail from Bay Road to it? Instead, you mentioned something instead of going up into the trailer park, getting straight.
Yeah, so I can't think of the gentleman's name. I know I've met him. He runs the kids camps.
Yeah.
Peter.
He's got the boats.
Peter Sawtell.
Yeah.
What is it?
Peter Sawtell.
Yeah.
And his wife Alicia.
So there's a little bit of space in between Peter's land and the next house toward town. And I accidentally walked out from Heron Point out to Bay Road that way one time. And we've crossed paths before, and he's like, oh yeah, it's okay, not a problem. But whether they would think that, you know, having access with people walking through there, once you get beyond his little property, it opens up and it's just woods.
It might be the abutters though that owns it, because we don't abut, Heron Point Sanctuary does not abut the Sawtells, I don't think.
Yeah.
So there's the other gentleman who owns most of that land
Yeah.
that you would need to talk to.
We have to look at that and see who the ownership is there. But that would be awesome if we didn't have to go up through the trailer
Absolutely,
park.
that would be really nice. Great, thank you for working on that. Do we go into non-public now, or do we? Yeah, but do we?
But you just announced, yes, you have to.
Then we come back and adjourn later. Okay, so we're going to go into a non-public session. Bye, thank you, Drew. Bye, Paul, thank you.
Bye.
You have to stay to the house,
What's that?
You have to stay to the house,
You have to stay here.
I used to.
Yeah, we just need to turn off the computer. Do they record it, or is it being recorded?
I have no idea what they're doing. No,
They don't record it, right? We have to turn off the.
Oh, they have to, yeah, you have to turn it off.
You gotta turn, she knows that? Yep, all right.
Refuse.
Yeah, all in favor, say aye.
I wanna stay.
Who did it? I'll pick from all of us.